And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my channel. I don't think I say it enough. It's Adventure Town Communique. And that's my channel. I wanted to be a little hoity-toity when I came up with the name, but it didn't register at that. It's still under my own personal name. So Mr. Scott Allen Roberts or Mr. Scotty Roberts. It's how it's listed. But thank you for being here. See, a couple of you are here already viewing. You're not in the chat, so I can't say hello to you, but thanks for being here. And as soon as people start lining up, we'll do our normal evening meet and greet. And I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for sticking with me through the reading of these books and all the stuff that we're doing with it. I hope you're enjoying it. On top of that, I hope you're getting something out of it. And pardon me while I do just a little personal sound check while we're talking. Yep, there we go. We're there. We're live. Now, I was told by Audrey that my sound went up and down last night. I think that's because I do things like this when I'm reading. I go over here and I go over here. So I'll try to be very mindful of that tonight. And Fran, welcome. Good to see you. Nice to have you here tonight. And it's a good Wednesday night, a nice hump day. It's hump day. Hated that ad when it came out, but you know how cultural things seem to stick. Pop cultural things. And so there we go. And I've had a full day of working and working on stuff for my client who is having me do some graphic novels this summer. And if you hang on a second, I'll just show you. Hang on. I was just doing some character studies today. I don't know if you can hear me very well out here, but I'll grab this and show you what's going on with it. If you hang on, there we go. I'm none too fond of this. The graphic novel I'm doing is going to be in black and white and, you know, inked. That's the way that we thought it was the most cost-effective way to produce the thing. And at the same time, I'm going to do some color inserts and do color covers for 3 of this. Well, this was one of the characters that I was just trying to do some character studies today with this. This gives you an idea what I do during the day. So this is this character, and he's an underwater photographer, is how the book opens up. So there he is. It's probably a little distorted on the screen, but that's a little watercolor. And so what I'm going to do is do these in black ink to match the inside of the books themselves. So I wanted to give them a little color just to show them, you know, what I'm doing. So that's what I do during the day. That's my day job. And I get to draw pictures for a living and design things and all of that. So it's a lot of fun. And as you probably note, I am just killing a little time to let enough people get in here and we'll get rolling. Not that you don't count, Fran, and those other 5 of you who are out there somewhere. You all counted, but I thought I'd just let us get the room a little more packed before we just start rolling. And I was reminded today, a favorite quote of mine. You know, I'm part of a group on Facebook it's called Men That Wear Hats. And as you can see, I've got, you know, quite a little hat collection going. I get all my hats through John Penman, the Penman Hat Company. And he does the finest in custom designs. John Penman, a friend of mine, he started out as a firefighter and was disabled about 15 years ago, if I've got the chronology correct. And he was looking for something that he could do with his time. And he was into the Indiana Jones movies and the hats and so on. So he started figuring out how to make a decent replica of the Indiana Jones fedora. And he went to some of the old guys that had created them for the movies and stuff like that. And he got all the little meticulous details down and really learned how to do hats. He's now made over 5,000 hats since he started. And he is probably the foremost person to go to get custom bespoke hats or to have the replicas he makes. Mine are, my hats are, I don't have one of the Indiana Jones hats. I actually got one of those for John Ward The same year he got me that little statue made, I had given him at the same show where he presented that to me. I presented him with his Indiana Jones fedora made by John Penman, Penman Hat Company. And my hat was this baby up here. I've got it up on the wall because it's kind of retired. And the reason it's retired is I've worn this all over the world several times, to Egypt and back. But you see what I did there? Put a little hole in the crown right up there. And that's because I was doing it wrong. I was pinching the hat like this to put it on. You don't do that. Put a hat on by the brim. That's proper. And so that's the way they're worn. And because of that, it could probably be aesthetically repaired. But I've just taken and I've retired this hat. It goes on the wall now. And that's where it stays. Unless I take it out for a picture or something. So there it is. And so John makes these replica hats. That one, my hat, is the Casablanca. It's aptly named because it is his replica of the hat that Humphrey Bogart wore in the movie Casablanca. And of course, John has the Indiana Jones hat. And there's several things about that hat, the detailing on it, that is like unto none other. For instance, there's one little thing. When a man wears a hat, and I'll show you this. If I take this hat and put it on, now you can see where the bow is. It's over my ear, pretty much, this bow. Well, that's where it sits. Well, Harrison Ford, when they were bashing his hat, it was just a rounded dome. He puts it on and they shape it, and then they steam it and stuff like that. He took the hat when he was putting it on and he twisted it a little bit like that. And so they ended up bashing it here. And his bow, if you watch the movies, sits above his temple, not above his ear. And they call that, hat makers call that the Indy turn. You're not going to find that anywhere, I think, except on Penman's hats. And so those are some of the details he does. And I don't know why I got into hats tonight. I was saying something that made me think of hats. But John Penman is my hattier, and ever shall be, ever always will be. And I always say Penman only, and Penman hats, hashtag. So Matt is a hatter, yes. And by the way, Michelle, you mentioned the Temple of Doom. He's got a different hat. Did you know that Indiana Jones actually had a different hat for every one of those movies? A different, slightly different style of hat. And there was the hat for Raiders. There was the hat for Temple of Doom. There was the hat for the Crusade, the Last Crusade. And there was a different hat when he's up in the 50s in Crystal Skull. So all these hats are slightly different, even though you would look at it and go, oh, that's Indiana Jones' hat. And so John Penman does them all. If you ever want to take a look at a good hat, pick up yourself a good hat. I will say this, they're not cheap. You get every bit of what you're paying for, however, in quality and custom bespoke hats. And John does these all by hand, no machinery. And so he has, like this hat right here. He made this hat for me and sent it to me. And this hat is, it's beaver. And it's this ribbon is about a 70-year-old vintage bow ribbon that he put and made the bow on and put that on this hat. And so he made that for me and sent it to me a few years ago. And so go to penmanhats.com, PENMAN hats, penmanhats.com. You can also look up John Penman on my Facebook or the Penman Hat Company. You can see all the stuff he does. Yeah, Michelle, fantastic craftsmanship. And I need to get him on just to talk to him on the radio someday. He has a very interesting story. And you know, what's funny, he started like I am, you know, little fanboy, and he was at one of these conventions, and he wears his hats, of course, and he'll pass out his cards if he doesn't have a table. And he had his son there, and he's meeting William Shatner, who's signing. And William Shatner looked up at him, and he was wearing one of his own Indiana Jones hats. And he looks up and he goes, "Oh my God." He says, "Where did you get that hat?" And of course, John told him, and Shatner grabbed him, pulled him aside backstage, and said, "Here's my private phone number, and give me a call. I want to get one of those." And of course, Shatner bought one. And then there's guys like Brent Spiner, who played Data on The Next Generation. He's got a couple of Penman hats. There are a bunch of guys from the Star Trek. The guy who plays McCoy now, Carl Urban in the J.J. Abrams movies. He's got a couple of them. And then, of course, Katie Sackhoff, who was Starbuck. Remember her in the new remake of Battlestar Galactica? If you didn't know this, she dates Carl Urban, who plays McCoy in the J.J. Abrams movies. And she got a hat from Penman. And then all these stars, guys who, one of the guys who plays Doctor Who, older Scottish guy, can't think of his name off the top of my head. He bought one of his hats. And there was one day that John Penman calls me on the phone. He says, "Scotty, you are not going to believe this." He says, "I am sitting at lunch with William Shatner, who invited me out to lunch. William Shatner, Michael Garibaldi, I think his name is, or something like that, who played the Doctor Who, and Brent Spiner, who played Data. And there was one or two other people." And he says, "Dude, I'm sitting here with these people I watched on television." And he says, "And now I'm making their hats and eating lunch with them." And so he's just as excited about his growth and getting to this fantastic place with his hat making. So all that to say, he's not a paid advertiser here. I just thought, we started talking about my hats. I did anyway. And I thought I'd let you know. If you want to get a good hat, go see penmanhats.com. If you scroll down a little bit, he's got a little, John Ward and I became his poster boys for a while. So he's got a little section that scrolls by a bunch of pictures of John and I in his hats in Egypt. So that's always fun too. So, hey, you know what, Becky? I see your message there. It's all right. That's okay. It's not like any of us haven't gotten drunk before. So it's just fine. Not even a need to apologize. I knew right where you were coming from. Hope everything works out well. Let's see. I Shatner you not. Yes. And let's see. Lola Joy, good to see you. Michelle, good to see you. And let's see who else we got hanging out right now. That might be it so far. And Fran, I already said hello to you. And so there we go. That's everybody who's in the chat room right now. There's still a bunch of you out there still watching. But so let's get this ball rolling for tonight. We are getting close to the end of the book because we're frankly getting close to the end of the story. If you see here, this is what we've read. This is what's left. And there's a huge section in the back of bibliography running for a good, let's see, it's from, 266, running from page 247 to 266. That's 19 pages, is the admonitions of an Egyptian sage. And John wanted to put that in there because he makes so much reference to this document, ancient document. He makes reference to it in so many of his chapters that is in the end material. We call it Appendix A in the book. And of course, there's our bibliography. We've got the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt and the Egyptian kings. That's in there. The chronology of the kings. You've got we're on chapter 11 tonight, and the last chapter is chapter 12, and then on to the conclusion. So I'm going to start with chapter 11. It's called The Wilderness. This is one of John's chapters in the Hapu thread, and this chapter goes for, how many pages we got here? I think it's about 20 pages. Oh no, 236 from 219. So we're looking at, roughly 17 pages. Did I do that right? 17 or so pages. So let's get to the reading and let's see where we are. at the end of this. Now, this is called Chapter 11, The Wilderness. John Ward's chapter, The Hapu Thread. And in case you're joining us new and you don't know who Hapu is, Amenhotep, son of Hapu, is the guy that John thinks was the archetype for the legend that created the biblical Moses. And his contention in the last chapter he wrote was that, in the book here, was that the Israelites, remember we talked about the 72 rabbis who went and got permission from Ptolemy II, the Greek pharaoh of Egypt in the 400s. They got permission from him to go to the Library of Alexandria and recreate, not create is not the right word, restructure, rewrite, if you will, the Old Testament, which was the Jewish book of faith. And in that, John mentions that Hapu was somebody that he believes the 72 rabbis used as an archetype for their Moses, and they patterned Moses after him. I disagree with John vehemently on that point, but he's got other facts that he uses to support his claim. So let's just keep going here. I'm going to let him say it in his own words. So here we go. Hapu was more than capable of leading an expedition into the wilderness, and his wealth of knowledge would have been an inspiration to many, not to mention his spiritual understanding and great literary familiarity with sacred texts, which have been associated with biblical scripture. Could he have split the Red Sea to allow the fleeing migrants to escape capture by Pharaoh's army? I think not. But I can see him presenting an alternative route across the upper northeastern trade route, which leads to the peninsula of the Sinai wilderness, or taking one of the numerous moored boats that made up the fleet of ships that ferried the mined ore. Would he have been able to draw water from the living rock? There are many examples where fresh water supplies have been located in or behind solid rock, a geological phenomenon that is not rare in Egypt. Taking the well-trodden eastern trade route as their exit out of the Thebaid, they would have met with little resistance from the military outposts, not only due to Hapu's high-ranking position, but also because the army patrols would have been called back to Thebes to restore some kind of order and stability in a city that had become lawless and desolate. Their departure out of the Theban city would have met with some local resistance given their sheer size and amount of provisions they would have had to have been carrying with them, though it is plausible to suggest that their numbers would have swelled as those who looked upon them had second thoughts and chose to join their ranks, as it presented a better alternative to dying in a dead city. Let's see. Passage to the wilderness. The eastern trade routes were already well established during the 18th dynasty, particularly because of Hapu's countless quarrying expeditions to places like Wadi Hammamat and the Sinai Peninsula, having ample watering holes en route and numerous places offering shelter and the journey would have been rather comfortable given the apparatus of the already existing along its well-trodden paths. Of course, this does somewhat depend upon a number of individuals that accompanied Hapu on the Exodus. Biblical text refers to tens of thousands that left Egypt, and all in one day upon Pharaoh's command to leave. But with the population of Thebes at that time, and the devastation that the flood would have incurred upon that number, I would suggest that a few thousand undertook the journey. If one was to add up the number of supposed Hebrew slaves, their wives, children, parents, grandparents, friends, relatives, livestock, and the plundered bounty, one can only imagine the beginning of the great trail of now freed slaves would have reached the Red Sea coast, while the end of the trail was still in the process of leaving Thebes. Almost totaling 1 million in number, according to the biblical numbers, by the way, which I think are skewed. I could only imagine the hygienic nightmare this would have proposed. The logistics are completely mind-blowing, and I suppose this is where faith comes into play, allowing one to believe the extraordinary numbers and logistics to facilitate such an exodus. Imagine that. If you've got 600,000 men, as the Bible states, Jewish men, or Hebrew men, or Israelite men, and their wives, and their kids, and their parents. Now, I think the parents were probably included. The grandfather was probably included in with the men, and their livestock, and every belonging as a slave that they owned that they could fit on a cart or on their backs. Imagine that multiplied by 600,000, were all the men married and had a dozen kids? Probably not. So let's say if you take half of those and say they had 5, 6 kids, what if you had the other half had 2 or 3 or 1 or none? Well, just look at the horde and imagine that horde walking across the desert to the Red Sea and the Sinai Peninsula. And imagine that. Imagine, John mentions here, the hygienics of it. Imagine everybody who had to poop in the morning. Imagine everybody who had to pee along the way. Imagine the animals leaving their fecal matter. There it is. I mean, you've got quite a nasty. Think of all the Central Americans that are making their way to the Southern American border, United States border. Everybody's talking about how now they've been given cell phones, of course. They're given food. They're given sleeping bags and stuff like that. So somebody's funding all of that and giving them things. But imagine if they were doing that without any of those conveniences. What would that look like? What would it smell like? And this is what you're dealing with the Exodus. And so there you are. And I know, I will tell you by experience, you can poop in a sand dune. It works. And you just bury it. I have left many a mark in the Egyptian deserts. So now, while in the wilderness, those that sought only peace and answers, that which they had experienced in Thebes, managed a meager existence. And the head of their party proclaiming a spiritual leadership over them. There are many examples of biblical narrative from the Old Testament that bear significant resemblance to ancient texts and writings of the ancient Egyptians. Papyrus that has made its way down through the millennia speaks of covenants and rules by which to live one's lives. It's similar. This writing is similar to the words of Moses, received from God on the mountain of Sinai, as retold in Exodus 20, 2 through 17. Now listen to this. And God spoke all these things, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself any carved images or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers onto the children, to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me. I always wondered, why would a just God hold children 3 and 4 generations out liable for the father, grandfather, great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather's sins? That makes no sense to me. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord your God will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, not your son, not your daughter, not your manservant, not your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. I always wondered about that. There is God who said, hey, because I rested on the seventh day, you're damn well going to rest on the seventh day too. There goes free will out the window. All right. Just saying. So let's see. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God has given you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is in you, that is your neighbor's. It leaves out the man. So women, you can covet the next door neighbor man, according to this commandment. I'm kidding. An interesting addition to the biblical narrative, the law of the altar, is in Exodus 20, 23 through 24, follows the verses I've just shown. You shall not make anything to be with me. Gods of silver or gold you shall not make for yourselves. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen, in every place where I record my name. I will come to you and I will bless you. And I've got a picture here of the Ptolemaic period horned altar at the Karnak Temple Complex in Luxor, Egypt. So there's a horned altar there. That's what they call a horned altar. And I know in the temple and in the tabernacle, that was a place of sanctuary. If somebody was seeking your life for something you did wrong, if you could make it to the temple, you could hang on the horns of the altar and cry for sanctuary, so somebody could come and help you, and you could get some judicious time before the king or before the judge. Now, the reason I've mentioned this particular section of Exodus, says John, is to point out that during the time period that the 72 Hebraic scholars were in Alexandria, under the invitation of Ptolemy II and Queen Arsinoe, the Arsinoe festival most probably took place. It was a decree that during the processional march, altars of earth were to be used instead of stone altars to receive the offerings and the sacrifice. This small but important point may indicate that the Hebraic scholars did indeed take contemporary information and material and placed it within the narrative, even though it was out of context, and surely would not have taken place during the time period in which Exodus was as implied. These earthen altars are but one example of this type of insertion to suit the agenda of the Hebrew narrative. Now, I will say that Moses, in structuring things, borrowed a hell of a lot of things from Egyptian culture, from Sinaitic culture, from Mesopotamian culture. There were a lot of things. The Ark of the Covenant itself is an Egyptian bark shrine. And we've mentioned this before. And the temple itself, the temple in Jerusalem that Solomon built, the precursor to that was the big tent, the tabernacle of the covenant, that they put up with big poles and a big tent out in the wilderness when they wandered for 40 years. And the whole place was a tent. And the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant sat. This was all big tents separated by a big veil. And they had the laver where you would wash and all the lampstands and all of that. So a lot of things were borrowed from Egyptian and Sinaitic and other cultures of the day. Spell 125. This is interesting. Hey, Jason, good to see you. Much love and favor right back to you. TT, good to see you too. And let's see, Jeannie, I think I saw you earlier. Holly, nice to see you. Glad you're here. And let's move on. And I think I got everybody there. The Book of the Dead is a compilation of various spells and incantations that have been handed down throughout the past few millennia. Some derive from the latter periods in Egyptian history, whereas others have their origins in the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom. I would like to draw your attention, says John, to spell 125. There are a few versions depending on the period and its translation, but here is one example which clearly shows comparisons between the Old Testament narrative and those of ancient Egyptian. It states, spell 125, Oh, Strider, I have not sinned. O flame embracer who came from Raha, I have not robbed. O who came forth from Hermopolis, I have not been greedy. O swallower of shadows who came from the caravan, I have not stolen. O fierce face who came forth from Rosetau, I have not killed people. O who came forth from the sky, I have not debased measures. O eyed one who came forth from Letopolis, I have not done crooked things. O one who came forth backward, I have not stolen the gods. O bone breaker who came forth from Heracleopolis, I have not killed people. O prosperer of the flame who came forth from Memphis, I have not taken away food. O caravan or cavern dweller who came forth from the west, I have not been ill-tempered. Oh, and this goes on for quite a bit. Let's get into it. Oh, white-toothed one. See, this is where it goes. You can see that whole thing right there is spell 25. Let's see. O white-toothed one who came forth from the Fayum, I have not transgressed. O blood eater who came forth from the slaughtering block, I have not killed divine cattle. O eater of entrails who came forth from the court of the 30, I have not profiteered. O Lord of truth who came to I have not robbed rations. O strayer who came forth from the Bubastis, I have not eavesdropped. Look at these gods, these Egyptian gods that covered all these things. O pale one who came forth from Heliopolis, I have not been garrulous. Oh, that's a word I don't use that often. I had to pause on it for a second. Oh, doubly evil viper who came forth from Busiris, I have not quarreled except on behalf of property. Oh, Wempty snake who came from the place of execution, I have not committed adultery. O seer of what he carried, of who came forth from the house of Min, I have not been chaste. O thou who art over the firstborn who came forth from Kum El Hissen, I have not inspired terror. O attacker who came forth from Zois, I have not transgressed. O troublemaker who came forth from Rai, I have not been hot-tempered. O child who came forth from the Heliopolitan gnome, I have not been deaf to words of O proclaimer of speech who came forth from it's WNS, two separate, Unesi, I have not made trouble. O Bubasite, that's my favorite god. O Bubasite who came forth from the crypt, I have not winked at injustice. O backward facer who have come forth from the tomb pit, I have not done wrong sexually, I have not practiced homosexuality. O hotfoot who came forth in the twilight, I have not dissembled. O dark one who came forth from darkness, I have not quarreled. O bringer of his offering who came from Sais, I have not done violence. O Lord of persons who came forth from the Nedf, I have not been quick-tempered. O counselor who came forth from Wenet, I have not misrepresented my nature. I have not washed the god. O horned one who came forth from Esuit, I have not gossiped about matters. O Nephitim, who came forth from Memphis, I have done no wrong, I have done no evil. O thou who lets none survive, who came forth from Busiris, I have not reviled the king. O thou who acts as he will, who came forth from Antiopolis, I have not waded in the water. O thou who came forth from the deep, I have not been loud voiced. O prosperer of the common folk who came forth from his dwelling, I have not reviled God. O uniter of good things who came forth from the harpoon gnome, I have not been puffed up. O uniter of attributes who came forth from the city, I have not made distinctions of others from myself. O head up who came forth from the pit, not large have been my needs except of my own property. O carrier off of this portion, who came forth from the silent land, I have not reviled the God in my city. All right, next section, the Holy Mountain and Hathor. Serebet el-Chedim, which we have talked about already. The temple or sanctuary of Hathor and Ptah sits on the western mountain range of the Sinai. It was here that each consecutive mining expedition set out by their respective pharaoh would erect a stele in commemoration to their miraculous feats of engineering and quarrying. Each room within the temple complex held an array of steles, each one having been carved in hieroglyphs, paying homage to their pharaoh. At the far end, 2 caves stood side by side, one being dedicated to the god Ptah and the patron saint of the craftsmen of healing, while the other was dedicated to the goddess Hathor, where a natural spring gave forth life-giving force of water in such an inhospitable place. Located among the undulating hills on the plateau of Serebet el-Chedim are various workshops where one can find discarded and unused steles. They're still there, by the way, folks. These piles, a stele, if you think of it, it's like, think of a cemetery, old gravestone with the rounded top, flat. A stele is something that was inscribed on both sides with hieroglyphics or writings of certain sort, demotic sometimes. And they could range from a foot tall to 8 feet tall or more. And these are all over the top of Serebet el-Chedim. And there are piles of debris from 3,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago. Just pits that are piles of unused stelae or broken stelae while they were carving them. It's all over the place. It's neat to see. There was a workshop up there. All right. You can find the discarded and unused steles or tablets that had not been completed or received their engraving words of homage and patronage. Could this possibly be, now this is important, could this be the mountain where Moses received the word of God upon the 2 tablets, the 2 stelae of stone that became known as the 10 Commandments? Could it be that Serebet el-Chedim and its association with Hathor have any relation or association with the golden calf that was crafted from the smelted gold of the Hebrews by Moses' brother Aaron? We can look to Exodus 32, 2 through 35 for clues. And John's got a very lengthy Exodus passage in here. It says, "Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us gods that shall go before us, for as this man Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't even know what's become of him. Where'd he go?'" This is a clue in the Exodus chapter, and I don't know if I deal with that at the very end here in the next chapter. I just want to see the Ark of the Covenant, the Bark Shrine. I don't think so. But something I may not have hit on is when we were at Serebet el-Chedim, you could stand at the base of this mountain. We stood there in the full moonlight one night. You're out in the middle of the godforsaken, empty Sinai wilderness. And the full moon is out and not a cloud in the sky and crisp, cool air. And everything was lit up almost like daylight. And we're standing there, and I'm standing with John, and you see Serebet el-Chedim lit up in the moonlight in the background. And I said, imagine, John, what it would have been like if this truly is the place and that story is true, where all these Israelites gathered at the base of this mountain for an encampment. And they're all spread, I said, through this wadi and all around the backside of the mountain here. And they're all spread out here in these encampments. And at a night like this, you could hear the goats, you could hear the sheep lowing, the cattle lowing, you could hear the bells, if any of them were the bells. You could hear people singing and talking around campfires, the smell of cooking. All of this was going on around you. And I said, it all happened right here on this spot. And then you've got this passage with the golden calf. Here you've got the Israelites who have been delivered from bondage in Egypt, led out by Moses, who was the bringer of the 10 plagues and the guy that got them freed. And they're already complaining to him. And he brings them out. They've seen the 10 plagues, all these miracles of God. They've seen the Red Sea parted, or the Sea of Reeds parted. They see all these miraculous wonders. And yet here they are at the mountain, and what do they say? They come to Aaron and they say, "Where's this guy, Moses?" That's the vernacular form of what they're saying here. When they say, that shall go before us. And for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's even become of him. And so what you've got here are people, it says Moses was up on the mountaintop for 40 days and 40 nights. And the people are all down here at camp. They're waiting for him to come down. I'm sure he probably didn't share with everybody, here's what I'm doing. He says, camp here, I got to go up and meet God. And so he goes up the mountain, and he's meeting with the priests up there, I believe, at Serebet El Chedim. And he crafts the 10 Commandments. He probably studies up there, researches, does this on these stelae. And here's the people down below, and they go, they weren't familiar with Moses. Moses was kind of set apart from them. And they're kind of like, Aaron, where's this dude? Where's this guy, Moses? He led us out here. He's been up in the mountain. For all we know, he's dead, says one version. Where'd he go? And they said, tell you what, make us a god that we can worship. And then this is where the golden calf comes from. Let's see. So it goes on, and Aaron said to them, break off the golden earrings that are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. So see, even sons and daughters back then wore earrings. And so all the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made a molded calf. Then they said, he said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. And he crafted Hathor. And so when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. Then they rose early on the next day, offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. You wonder what that means. In the Hebrew, that means more than pulling out the yard jarts or setting up the badminton net. And the Lord said to Moses, go get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. Then they have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them, and they have made themselves a molded calf, and worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, this is you, God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Brought us out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation. This is something that always made me wonder about God, is he has the volatile emotions of a human being, yet he calls himself omnipotent, all-knowing, all-present, all-understanding, the God of love, the God of pure holiness, all of these things, all these attributes of God. Yet he was also a guy that goes, get out of my sight. Go ahead. I could see him with his arms crossed. Go. I'm not talking anymore. Let me burn in my wrath against these people. You go take care of it. And then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people and who you've brought out of the land of Egypt with your great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say, he brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn your fierce wrath and relent from this harm to your people. Remember Abraham, remember Isaac, and Israel, Jacob, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven. And all this land that I have spoken of, I now give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. So the Lord relented from the harm which he said he would do to his people. That's very interesting. There are other versions of this passage that says God was going to destroy his people Israel. And Moses talked him out of it. In a sense, talked God off the ledge. And it says, and God repented of the evil that he was going to do against his people. So Moses changed the mind of God. Yet this is the God that's all-knowing. Is this God acquiescing to humanity again? I'm gonna let him think, they can talk me out of things and stuff like that. I'm really this all-powerful God who knows everything and does everything. Yet you see so often human attributes given to God all through the Old Testament. He got pissed off. He got enraged. But when you're holy, you see, I look at somebody like, I'm just pulling this out of my hat. Look at the Dalai Lama. How often do you suppose the Dalai Lama gets pissed off and get out of my room, get out of my room. I'm hot with rage. You go take care of it. I don't see the Dalai Lama doing that because he is somebody who is refined the way he thinks and the way he is and so on. Is God not higher than that? Is God not better than that? So this always gives me pause when I read these things about God. And Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in his hand. The tablets were written on both sides. On the one side and on the other they were written. Now the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there's a noise of war in the camp. But Moses said, it is not the voice of those who shout in victory, nor is it the voice of those who cry out in defeat, but the voice of those who sing is what I hear. So it was, as soon as he came near the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. So Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hand and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Imagine being the guy that led him out of all of this, and you're supposed to be taking him to God's promised land, and you're 2 or 3 weeks out, and what happens? You build an idol out of gold, you're dancing, you're having promiscuous sex all over the place, and all of this stuff is going on. You come down, you'd probably be, I'm not God, I'm getting pissed off. And he smashes the tablets. Well, what would God have done? Does God have a godlier approach, or would God have gotten pissed off and wiped them all out in the snap of his fingers? So I think of Chuck from Supernatural. If you watch that show, you know my immediately, the correlation I'm making. All right. Then Moses took the calf that he had made, and he burned it in the fire, and ground it into powder, and he scattered it in the water, and made the children of Israel drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do that you have brought so great a sin upon them? So Aaron said, don't let the anger of my Lord become hot. You know the people, they're set on evil. You know these people. For they said to me, make us gods that shall go before us out of the land of Egypt. We don't know what has become of Moses. And I said to them, whosoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, and I cast it into the fire. This came out. Now when Moses saw that the people were unrestrained, for Aaron had not restrained them, to their shame among their enemies, then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp and said, whoever is on the Lord's side, let him come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. Now, that's only one tribe. Levi was only one tribe. The Levites were the priestly caste all through Israel's history. And it says the Levites came to him. And he said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let every man put his sword on his side and go in and out from entrance to entrance throughout the camp. And let every man kill his brother, every man his companion, and every man his neighbor." Wasn't there a scene where the Pharaoh said, "They are but slaves," and he sends his armies out to kill all the firstborn males, and they murdered them all? This is not like that, but it's akin to that. You're killing. Would God have a better approach? Or is this the stuff of men? Was Moses doing this, in other words? So the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. 3,000 people killed on the spot for dancing, being corrupt, building an idol out of gold. Couldn't Moses have just said, "Hey, drink this water I've sprinkled the ashes in and learn your lesson, dumbasses. Let's get." But no, they had to kill 3,000 of them. Then Moses said, "Consecrate yourselves today to the Lord, that he may bestow on you a blessing this day. For every man has opposed his son and his brother." And it came to pass on the next day that Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin, so now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." Then Moses returned to the Lord up at the top of the mountain and said, "Oh, these people have sinned a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of your book which you have written." And the Lord said to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of the book. Now therefore go, lead the people to the place of which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I shall visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon them for their sin." So the Lord plagued the people because of what they did with the calf which Aaron had made. Now, remember, we're dealing with faith-based biblical narrative because historical and archaeological material does provide us with some interesting facts that could be evidence that this was the location in which Moses did indeed receive the word of the Lord God. What we have not yet discovered on the mountains of the Sinai are the graves of 3,000 who lost their lives due to the transgression. Now, you know what? I don't care. You can go back many thousands of years in history. If there's a mass grave, I mean, you'll find a mass grave of a dozen people, and it stands out like a sore thumb. 3,000 people? Where'd they go? It was such bloodshed for a religion that is supposed to be of peace and love. So I find this particular section difficult to comprehend. The willingness of their participation in mass murder. But what if Hapu had led this assemblage to Serabet el-Khadim via the route that hugged the eastern shores of the Red Sea, and in doing so, provided his group with ample food and water supplies that ran down from the mountains of the Sinai into the sea below? This route would have been well trodden, and again provided watering wells and shelter along its route. Having traversed many, if not all, the ancient trade routes in the western deserts of Egypt, I'm more than familiar with the abundance of infrastructure that was created to facilitate the transportation of rare commodities and trade from Egypt's neighbors. These routes were so well established that they were probably more akin to our motorway systems, given the amount of heavy traffic that rode along their dusty paths. It would not have been such a lonely place as we might imagine. Now think of it too, Serabet el-Khadim, the center point of copper mining for Egypt, turquoise mining for Egypt, this whole region. You can stand atop Serabet el-Khadim and look across the valley over to the next peak over, and you can see the old mines are there. all scattered all throughout the place. And so this is a well-traveled route. The route they took, I think, through the Sea of Reeds, down the eastern shore of the Red Sea, and taking a left all of a sudden, they ended up at Sarabat el-Khadim, following the old roads that were well-trod because this was trade routes. So they're not out there they're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, think of being in the country today on old country roads, and you have no idea where you are, and there's a road going off miles in that direction, 1 mile in that direction, these dirt roads, cornfields, all of that. Imagine being in the desert 3,500 years ago, where there isn't a gas station, there isn't an Arby's or a Burger King every 10 miles, and there's no place to eat or drink. But there are wells along the way, and these have been well established. So there you go. Enough on that. All right. For me, says John, this is the theory where the theory becomes exciting. Hapu, the great architect and quarryman, would have had previous knowledge of Sarabat el-Khadim. In fact, it is most likely that he had visited the site early in his career and may have had some kind of spiritual enlightenment while there, similar to that of Moses with his experience in the burning bush. If Hapu led his group, number 4, to Sarabat el-Khadim, allowing them time to regather their strength and reserves from the ample water supplies and possibly limited vegetation that grew within the secreted valleys, Hapu may have journeyed to the top of the mountain, where the ancient site of Sarabat el-Khadim is located. Here he would have been able to contemplate his next move, considering all the aspects and pitfalls that may lie ahead of him. If we consider the plausible request that the royal children were indeed sent with him, then their safety and well-being would have been paramount and foremost importance in the mind of Hapu, with regard for the safety of the remaining group members coming a very close second. So what John is telling you here is the archetype, Hapu, was driven on this quest to bring the people out of Thebes, which had been destroyed, and bring them to a new place, and possibly even taking the royal children with him to protect them from what was going on. Within the site of Sarabat el-Khadim, there is a king list similar to the temple complex of Abydos. He would have been able to wander the pillared halls of the complex, reading the names aloud to himself, reminiscing about those that had indeed served during his long and fruitful life, their characteristics and mannerisms flowing like milk and honey through his mind, retrieving lost memories of past glories and moments lost. I'm going to type out Sarabat el-Khadim here. I want you to do this. While you're listening, go do a little Google search for Sarabat el-Khadim. Oops, that didn't type anywhere. Hold on. Sarabat el-Khadim. Now, you can go see pictures of this site. Go look at images and look there's some diagrams, 3-dimensional like architectural drawings of what these shrines all look like up there on the top of that mountain. And you get an idea of what this was like. There was not a palace up there, but there were shrines. There were pillared shrines with roofs on them that opened up to the west. And they could probably sit there in a nice chair with a couple of punkawallas fanning them and eating, grapes and wine, drinking wine. So anyway, it was, and there was a caste of priests that lived there. All right, let's move on. Within the site of Sarabat el-Khadim, I read that, we must also consider the condition and mindset of the participants of the Exodus and how they were dealing with the trauma of not only the crisis back home, but also the upheaval that they were experiencing. Would they be motivated? Were they lacking inspiration and spiritual guidance, being so far from home? Would they be accepting of Hapu and his plan? Had their initial approval of the Exodus arrangement wavered in the desperate heat of the desert? Hey, Audrey, I hadn't seen you there before. The Google images are very good. Let's see. Spectacular. Oops, yeah. That's the place where John and I were. We went up there. And mind you, this is not a touristy site. This is a temple in the middle of the fucking Sinai wilderness. Pardon my French for emphasis. There's nobody there. It's windswept. You got to climb the mountain to get there by foot. The sheikh and his people live there. There's a village there down in the flats below, and they own the region, and they're the protector of this place. When I asked him, I said, were you aware? I said that this mountain is associated with Moses. And he said, no, I did not know. And so they have this mountain, and people come to see it and climb it and see the temples up there and so on. So anyway, there you go. I'm sure that these worries concerned Moses as they did Hapu. The mistrust that had grown in the absence of Moses while he climbed the mountain to converse with God had manifested into a return to their native gods. Let's backtrack a moment and look at the crown prince Tutmosis. There is archaeological evidence from the tomb of Saqqara, where a small sarcophagus dedicated to the cat of the crown prince was interred. The inscriptions upon the casket inform us that the crown prince was a Sem priest, working and performing rituals and ceremonies relating to the Apis bull and their interment within the Serapeum, which is located a short distance from the step pyramid of Djoser, and one that Imhotep built, and who was subsequently deified by the Ptolemies together with Hapu, deified by the Ptolemies. By the way, if you remember my talking about my experience with Senenmut, my experience with the vision that I had, that photograph I posted, that strange photograph, that was all in the head Seb court, in just right below the stepped pyramid of Djoser, alongside of it. And if you walked out a little ways, you could get to the Serapeum, which was all underground. You had to go down like 30 steps to get down there, and they opened it up, and now they've got a boardwalk inside. They were just tunnels that were all carved out for where they put the sarcophagi of the Apis bull. And here's a picture of John, by the way, very hard to see, but as usual with the pictures and the way I have to do them. But if you see John there, John is this is inside the Serapeum. Those little niches in the walls, prayers and candles and oil lanterns and things like that. And this big thing down front, that's one of the sarcophagus that was made out of granite. So that's the Serapeum. Let's see. The one that Imhotep built and who subsequently deified the Ptolemies together with Hapu. It is also worth speculating that during the time the crown prince spent learning his craft with the other incumbent Sem priests, Hapu may have been in Memphis at the same time, having originated from the area and having spent his childhood there learning his craft too. Now, I call this next section the Temple of Bull. John writes, when Scotty was here in Egypt, we had the privilege of visiting the ancient Serapeum at Saqqara. While there, I shared with Scotty the sheer exhilaration I was experiencing as I entered the vast vaulted labyrinth. And I got to tell you, folks, he was darn right giddy when we got in there, because he had known about this place and they had only recently finished the excavations and opened it up so you could get inside. And he was laughing and giddy and jumping up and down. He's, Scotty, you aren't going to believe this. And so we had a good time going down to the Serapeum. And I shared with Scotty an imagined vision of the crown prince acting as an incumbent Sem priest, surrounded by his peers and high priest, recanting hymns and prayers that were only uttered within the sacredness of this holy sanctuary. Hapu attended dressed properly or appropriately in his white flowing robes and holding the staff of his office, while standing next to the living Horus, Pharaoh Amenhotep III, the father of the Sem priest who eagerly wished to impress his father with his knowledge and respect. It was quite a moving image, to say the least, one that will remain with me throughout my travels and adventures here in Egypt. And by the way, here is a picture of John This is not at the Serapeum. This is back at Serabat el Khadim, and he's sitting in the shrine of Amenhotep III, and inscribed on the stone right next to him is there is inscribed there the image of Amenhotep III and his name, his cartouche, and so on. Now, I happen to have sitting here, by the way, the magazine, which I've shown you before. Let's see where exactly it is. It's over here. Hang on. I want to show this to you. Same photograph, only it's in color here. Hang on. Just finding everything where I've resettled it after doing things. Oh, you can't see much. Sorry, after all that fanfare. But there's the same photograph on the cover of our Intrepid magazine of John sitting at, there's the stone that has the inscription on it of Amenhotep III, which is John's pharaoh. So there you go. Let me set this off to the side. That's the only copy I have of that left right now. All right, although I could order more. Okay. Let's see. Where do we leave off? Right over here. So, the crown prince was indeed a Sem priest of the Apis bull, which was also the same Apis bull from which Hapu's father had received his epithet. Coincidence? We have not only the Hathoric cow goddess, but also a Sem priest of the Apis bull, all in one area at the foot of Serabat el Khadim, where the Hathoric cave of the life-giving force was located. It is not impossible that the crown prince, alias Aaron, designed a golden calf at the bequest of his fellow subjects, as they turned to him for guidance and support in the absence of Hapu. He may have fashioned from the gold or other precious metals that they had taken with them from Thebes, or they may have mined for them or exchanged goods or other wares with the local miners. In any case, a golden calf was born and worshipped. So we can suggest that the Hebraic scholars took this material and then transformed it, added their own version of events that suited their own dogmatic viewpoint, adhering to the newly formed Judaic religion and all its conformities for which they had received their invitation to transcribe its history. Now, this is John's work, and I respect John, but I respectfully disagree with him on all of this. Sorry, John, if you're out there listening. He could do a bit. I should have had him. Getting him nailed down these days is impossible. Would have been fun to have him read his chapters. While wandering the halls of Serabat el Khadim, Hapu may have considered the spiritual welfare of his party, and in so doing, transcribed them a set of rules and regulations to guide, help, and nurture them during their journey. I refer to spell 125, which I compared to the Old Testament version of the Ten Commandments previously. Imagine Hapu sitting cross-legged with his long dress tucked under his feet upon the dusty floor. Strewn around him were the remnants of carving a set of sandstone tablets. He was smoothing their surface with the broken shard of pottery, removing any and all impurities from their flat face. Then he took his ceremonial dagger that was presented to him as a gift from his pharaoh, and he began inscribing upon the silky surface the sacred hieroglyphs and magical incantations that he had learned as a boy back in Memphis. If I may draw a comparison between the biblical text that refers to the conversation between God and Moses regarding his brother Aaron and the subsequent arrival of said brother, could it be possible that Hapu considered using the crown prince as his voice, seeking to elevate the crown prince's standing in the small but tight community? After all, he was the rightful heir to the kingdom of Egypt, the older son of the Pharaoh. In Exodus 4:14 through 17, we see that conversation take place. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, "Is not Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and look, he is also coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he'll be glad in his heart. Now you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you what you shall do. So he shall be your spokesman to the people, and he himself shall be as a mouth for you, and you shall be to him as God. And you shall take this rod in your hands, with which you shall do the signs and wonders. Now, John says, I do not suggest that Hapu was out to become a martyr or a prophet. I suggest he did what he thought was best for the integrity of his group and their well-being. If anything, his intentions were more than honorable, relying on years of wisdom that he had wished to impart upon his flock, having no children of his own and no wife to embrace him. He possibly took his massive fellow travelers on his own children and wished only to care for them as his own son. I would think that Hapu led a lonely life, always busy serving others while receiving praise and accolades for his service. But when he returned home, his bed was empty of love, and his corridors lay silent from the cries of children playing in the midday sun. His inner ornamental courtyard was bereft of young maidens frolicking among the lotuses and lilies, whispering about the stolen glances of young men. He had no son with whom to share his vast knowledge, nor with whom to show his battle scars or recanting stories of old pharaohs in the dim light of a campfire. I'm sure there are those of us who can empathize with him. Moses was the exact opposite in his early formative years, having been brought up in the palace of the Pharaoh as one who was served, not serving. His childhood would have been one of joy and learning the art of war. As he grew older, his life became strikingly similar to that of Hapu. His footsteps in the sand would have been great and mighty compared to those who walked in his shadow. When he ran from Egypt, he married and had children, though he could not share his burdens with them. Instead, he led a lonely life in the desert wilderness. Returning to Egypt, he left behind the family that Hapu never had, sacrificing his personal happiness for the greater good of his people. Upon his return to the deserts, he treated his fellow travelers as his own children, caring and loving them without regard for his own safety and needs. Now, again, this is what John is saying. If you remember the chapter I read you, remember that troublesome passage where Moses' wife circumcises their son, throws the foreskin at Moses' feet and said, "You're a bloody husband to me." This was on the way to Egypt at a lodging where they stayed that night. So, according to the biblical account, Moses' wife, Zipporah, and their sons, Gershom and Mahershal al-Hashbaz, and I think I can't remember the other one's name. These are sons that came with him. However, when they left, the safety of Serabet el-Khadim is unknown. But a stele was erected at Serabet el-Khadim in honor of the living god, Pharaoh Amenhotep III, by Sobek-hotep, the treasury overseer, son of Sobek-mos, in the 36th regal year of 1356 BC. This year happens to fall within the period I suggest the flood took place, the breaking of the walls of Lake Melkata. It may be that the stele had already been erected before their arrival, or indeed they may well have been working there, extracting turquoise upon the arrival of Group 4. It does not provide us with a certain date of departure, so the small community might have stayed within the vicinity for some period of time, spreading its claim in the land further and further as they searched and foraged for suitable supplies, becoming semi-nomadic in the process. And here's a picture. It's in black and white, of course, again. This is up high atop Serabet el-Khadim. This is that stele. Let's see, what's he say here? The fallen stele atop Serabet el-Khadim in the Sinai. And there you see it. And you can see some of the walls in the background of the temple compound, the shrines. And that stele leaning over there has the inscriptions on it. And it was a marker that was set there. And it's tumbled over. It's been sitting there for 3,500 years like that. Well, we don't know when it tipped over. But let's see. We're on the next page. This is going to wrap this chapter. The rest of the story I leave to faith. It was never my intention to pick apart or replace the entire biblical story of Exodus, says John. I merely wanted to present a series of events that may have acted as a catalyst for the main event to take place. I also wanted to show that there were indeed historical figures that truly lived and walked among the living that could have provided an inspiration for the characterization of Moses. Did Hapu lead them into the wilderness? We'll never know. And we will never know if Moses did either. I would like to think he did lead a group of survivors headed by the royal children and mentored by Hapu in the process. We have to rely on our own belief in faith systems to uphold virtues, similar to that of Hapu, describing the stone tablets. One would be accepted into the house of the gods. It matters not. We have only a brief moment on this planet, and how it is not written. It dwells within our hearts. Now that is John's chapter from the Hapu thread. Now the next chapter is the Ark of the Covenant and the ancient bark shrine. This is also part of the Hapu thread. And this is where we go into it. And right after that's the conclusion. So 244, 237. It's now 10:16. If you'd like, I can read this. It's only a few pages long. It's 7 pages. John's last chapter, and then our conclusion, which is only 2 pages. And we could very well finish this up if you'd like. If you'd like me to keep reading, just let me know. Otherwise, Fancy Microphone is temperamental tonight, like Scotty's John Ward. What's it doing? Is it just blotting out, folks? Is it just going blank on you? I don't know why it's doing that. I thought it might be because I was moving a little too much. My mic cord is good. I've double checked all this stuff over and over and over again. It's all set here. It's all set here. So we're good. There's something with the diaphragm inside this. So I'm turning purple. Yeah. Look at that. That's the blue light up there. I have a blue light that's supposed to give a little theatrical effect. It's actually when the lights are off in here and that's on, there's like orange paper that one of my little kids cut up into little diced pieces, and they're kind of scattered all over, and they glow in the dark. So that's almost like a black light up there, and I think that's why I'm getting the purple. But one of these days, that's another thing that I have to do. Okay, it's good now. That's good. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. Good for a while, but just now it faded out a bit. Sometimes if I over enunciate, this mic will go out. Look, I'll give you a little test. Watch this. If I talk about the city of Pyramses, Pyramses. Now that probably knocked my mic out. So that may have knocked my mic out for a second. I don't know. I need a new microphone. This is an old mic from my old radio broadcasting days. I think I need to update one of these days. When I move the book around too. There it is. Let me take a sip. I haven't done that all night. Audrey says, keep reading. Let's go. We got 7 pages. I got Rocky's show in 42 minutes. I think we will handily get through this 7 pages and possibly even the conclusion. Here we go. Ready? The Ark of the Covenant, the ancient bark shrine, Barque, bark shrine. This is part of the Hapu thread. The Ark of the Testimony, Exodus 25, 10 through 22. And they shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits. Now listen to how the ark is constructed. For all those who say, it's a power plant. Just listen to the way it's built. They shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length. It's roughly 4 feet. A cubit and a half its width, and a cubit is roughly 18 inches. So, you're looking at 2 feet by 4 feet, something like that. And a cubit and a half in height. And you shall overlay it with pure gold, inside and out. And you shall overlay it, and shall make on it a molding of gold all around. Like think of a molding around the top of a room. It's a molding around the top and the bottom. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in the 4 corners. 2 rings shall be on one side, and 2 rings on the other side. And you shall make poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold. You shall put the poles into the rings in the sides of the ark, that the ark may be carried by them. The poles shall be in the rings of the ark, and they shall be taken from it. Let's see. And you shall put into the ark of the testimony, which I will give you. You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. And you shall make the 2 cherubim of gold, of hammered work. You shall make them at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end, and the other cherub at the other end. You shall make the cherubim at the 2 ends. I love the way the Bible describes things. And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold, of hammered work. You shall make of them 2 at the ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end, and the other cherub at the other end. And you shall make the cherubim of the 2 ends of it, of one piece with the mercy seat. And the cherubim shall stretch out their wings above, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and they shall face one another. The faces of the cherubim shall be toward the mercy seat, and they shall face one another and none other. You shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I will give you, and there I will meet you. And I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim which are on the ark, of the testimony of all things which I shall give you in its commandment to the children of Israel. It reminds me of the hand grenade shall pull the pin. I don't remember the whole quote. And the counting of it shall be 3. Not 1, not 2, not 4, and 5 is right out. So anyway, you get it if you're a Monty Python fan. So John says, I open this chapter with the Old Testament quote from Exodus 25:10 through 22 regarding the Ark of the Covenant. That God requested of Moses and the children of Israel together with all the articles of the tabernacle. This is also included in the table for the showbread, the gold lampstand, the altar of burnt offering, the altar of incense, the anointing oil and the incense, the bronze laver, the court of the tabernacle, the garments of the priesthood, the ephod, the breastplate, and the other priestly garments. I include such detailed list because the items are important to the overall understanding of this chapter. When Moses left Egypt with the freed Hebrew slaves, they plundered the Egyptians. This bounty was mentioned again when the Egyptian army was crossing the Red Sea to recapture the Hebrew slaves and their bounty. However, the merciful God had other plans and crushed them beneath the heavy waters of the sea, drowning them and sending their bodies to a watery grave. Were they Hebrews when they left Egypt? I suggest that they were not Hebrew by any stretch of the imagination, but were most definitely Egyptians, or I would editorialize in John's chapter, Egyptianized. How a man that was born and brought up in a country in which his ancestors were also born and raised 400 years prior can hail himself from a different nation is absurd. By all means, assign a heritage or a hereditary culture, but we arrive at the same question I asked earlier, and that is, where is the evidence to support the biblical scripture and the identity of the Hebrews? I continue to search, but return empty-handed. Now, I use this example of myself. My ancestors all came to America before it was the United States in 1710. It was 300 years in 2010. It's now 2019, so it's been 309 years since my ancestors emigrated from Wales and settled in Virginia, in Goochland County, Virginia. Now, that 300 years, if you think about it and the fudging with some of the dates and the numbers, it's almost as if where I live now in this time would be the distance that some of these Hebrews were removed from their original relatives who migrated into the Egyptian Delta 300 to 400 years earlier. That's how much time has passed. if you put it into context. So, as I said the other day when I was reading, I am an American, but I have heritage in Wales and Scotland. But I'm still an American, even though my ancestors. So were the Hebrews? They were Egyptian. They grew up there. They lived there. That's who they were. They were Egyptianized, but they were still Hebrews from Canaan, and they longed to go home. It's like the old joke. Have you ever heard of the Irish boomerang? You throw it out, and it sings sad songs about going home again. So there you go. Let's see. However, if we take a different route and tackle from this from a different perspective, one that respects the heritage and culture, but also recognizes the culture and homeland from which they have been raised, I would propose that the people Moses freed from captivity were indeed Egyptian. We can indeed find evidence in Exodus for this as we continue to read through the various verses. And by the way, I put in a depiction of the Ark of the Covenant in a bas relief. This is not Egyptian. I believe this is Roman and a little later. But there's your Ark of the Covenant being carried by the priests. All right. So moving on in this chapter, the first verse I'd like to bring to your attention is the Song of Miriam, in which the sister of Moses and Aaron takes a timbrel in her hand and begins to play a tune together with the women of Israel, and associated dances begin to celebrate their miraculous escape out of the clutches of the Pharaoh and his chariots by the hand of God. It says, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea." And I can accept the celebration and its associated festivities at surviving such an ordeal, but I draw a... Goochland is close to me, says Lola Joy. I just happened to see that. Oh, that's very cool. I've only been by there once. I have not stopped. There's apparently the Robards' house is still there in Goochland from, I believe, the early 1700s. Robards was our family name out there. So I can, let's see. The timbrel is also the musical instrument that the god Bes is playing while dancing in the pictorial relief, represented on the side of the gilded chairs that adorned the tomb of the Princess Sitamun's grandparents. As I have suggested already, I propose that the character of Miriam is based upon Princess Sitamun, and her associations with the Hathoric cult, along with Hapu's mother. It was extremely popular during the 18th dynasty for the women of the household and the upper classes to be connected with the cult of Hathor. It would also be sensible to suggest that the Egyptians had fled Egypt with Moses would have had exposure to the Hathoric cult in one way or another, regardless of their class location. So covering all sides of the arguments, it's obvious that the Egyptian women that came out to celebrate their victory performed a semi-ritualistic dance based upon Hathoric themes. Next section is Raiders of the Lost Bark. I have to take credit for that header. The Ark of the Covenant is probably one of the most misunderstood items that the Hebrews created during their time in the wilderness. Adorning the walls of the Egyptian temples, the bark shrine stands out from most of them. It's a rectangular box that has certain characteristic adornments attached to its decoration. I have having poles that are connected to the four corners to facilitate carrying upon the shoulders of the priests. It usually rests upon another rectangular box that elevates it off the ground, with tables and stands by its side, which hold various libational jugs and other liquid-holding vessels. Offering plates, lamps, and fans usually stand by its side. All of these are contained within a tabernacle held by ornate poles to the corners with a decorative frieze adorning the top trim. Now, there's also a picture here. In the Sinai wilderness, high atop the remote mountain of Serebet el-Kedim, stands the sanctuary temple of Hathor. This is one of her many depictions at the ancient site. And this is Hathor up on Serebet el-Kedim. So there you go. It's not a blurry. Her image is worn away. So there you go. Now, do any of the items have any resemblance to the passage I wrote at the beginning of the chapter or the remaining articles of the tabernacle that were requested by Moses, by God? It's clear that the Ark of the Covenant is indeed an Egyptian bark shrine that has its roots within the confines of the sacred temples of Egypt. Returning to the question of whether the Hebrew slaves were indeed Hebrew or Egyptian, the bark shrine is the best example of this argument. The craftsmen were instructed to build the ark utilizing their own knowledge they had learned while in Egypt, which led to the bark shrine complete with the two protective goddesses that usually adorn the opposing sides of the sarcophagus, Isis and Nephthys, the sisters of Osiris. My teeth were slipping there. The sisters of Osiris. Now the important question has to be whether Moses actually ever commissioned the ark and whether it was an addition by the Judaic scholars in Alexandria. Another question to raise is, what language were the tablets written in that held the Ten Commandments? Was it hieratic, hieroglyphic, or some other form of cursive text? The Egyptian bark shrine was used during most of the celebrations. It carried within it the idol of the respective temple it originated from. These representations of the living gods could then visit one another by being carried on the shoulders of the incumbent priests. One of the best and most beautiful depictions of this kind of festivity is the Opet festival that took place between Karnak and Luxor. The Theban triad was carried aloft along the spectacular sphinx-lined avenue on the shoulders of the white-robed priests. Freshly shaven, having their leopard skin draped over their chests, wearing their turned up sandals, the bark shrine would have the illusion of gliding through the air. This was preceded by an array of dignitaries and other high officials, all dressed and looking rather pompous as they strode ahead of the divine bark. The incised relief upon the walls of the enclosed colonnade at Luxor Temple depicts the procession in wonderful detail, complete with the facial expressions of the priests as they proudly hold aloft their beloved God on their humble shoulders. And I want to show this to you. This is the Egyptian bark shrine from the walls of Luxor Temple, depicting the Opet festival. Does it look familiar? Now, I have taken, when I did this image, and I lightened the priests and the bark shrine and the poles on which they're carrying it. So here you go. This is, I'll hold that there for a second as you try to make that out. That's the bark shrine up on top, and the poles and the priests carrying it. There you see what looks like the Ark of the Covenant, sitting right up on top. That's an Egyptian bark shrine. Let's see. The incised relief upon the walls of the enclosed colonnade at Luxor. Okay, I already did that, but it is the bark shrine that is important here. They contain within them the living personification of the god in statuette form, the words of God, the forms of God, the dress of God. The ark is merely another representation of the Egyptian bark shrine and not a new invention of the Judaic religion. It held the words of God written on Egyptian stelae or tablets, probably made from sandstone. And this is where the bark shrine itself is the model for the Ark of the Covenant. Similar to the famous crown. Oh, here, I'm going to show this to you. This is 2 bits of ancient graffiti depicting Egyptian bark shrines from the walls of the southern Karnak temple. This is on the outer walls. Somebody scratched these in there. Could either of these possibly be the actual Ark of the Covenant? This is on the walls of Karnak temple. You can see it here. It's shaped more like a boat here. And you can see it here. The bark shrine up on top. So those are two bits of graffiti scratched into the walls in antiquity. Similar to the famous crowns of the Egyptian pharaohs, not one bark shrine is yet to be discovered. Given the number of temples and shrines, it's hard to comprehend that not one has survived the test of time. Yet when we begin to understand the significance of them, one can then begin to appreciate why none have survived. However, many scholars and independent researchers have claimed to have discovered one or another hidden in sacred, unapproachable sanctuaries in Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, or even in Glastonbury, England. Did the freed Hebrew slaves carry before them the power of God, held within a box of acacia wood, gilded in gold? Again, this falls directly within the faith camp. I have discoursed, says John, with the bark shrine as a means of transporting the living gods incarnate within statues and not some mythical energy source that emitted some kind of radiation that consumed those who touched it. The Old Testament can be seen by many as a collection of horrific stories that tell of mass genocide, murder, rape, adultery, and other horrifying acts of human insanity. For me, it's purely a controlling aspect of the indoctrination that goes hand in hand with the religion. But for sure, we will never uncover the real truth of what took place in the wilderness, or if it took place at all, as we have been led to believe. I can easily imagine Hapu at Serebet el-Khadim with his handheld stele, adorned with the hieratic scripts of spell 125, having climbed down the mountain and approached the crown prince, and in gesture of benevolence he placed the steles in the living Horus's hands, empowering him in front of the watchful crowd. There is a certain serenity in writing about Hapu. He seems to bring out the good in me, says John. I see the predicaments and problems in a different way. I do not see the murder and destruction that I have had to read through and pore over within the Old Testament. With Hapu, I have had to imagine the pure anguish by those who experienced the destruction of Thebes, the death and chaos that ensued in the aftermath, the correlation to the plagues, the rise and subsequent destruction of the old guard as Antonists took to the streets, desecrating and eradicating the name and words of Amun-Ra. It has been a struggle at times to remain neutral and maintain a level ground on which to base my theories. I encourage you to question and research. Look for the truths hidden behind the metaphors and dogmas. For sure, we will never uncover all the truths, but we can start. As I have said before, it has never been my intention to replace Moses as an historical and religious icon. I merely want to show that there are other plausible scenarios that should be explored and investigated. It is certain that Hapu knew he had served and he had observed, but more importantly, he did not dictate. That's the end of the final chapter. Let's move on to the conclusion here. Now, this is the conclusion to the entire book. And I wrote most of this, so this is not part of the Senenmut thread, but these are my words for the most part. And I'm going to start. The authors, John Ward and Scotty Roberts, at Karnak Temple in Luxor, Egypt. This is, by the way, there's John and I at Karnak Temple. And on the wall behind us was where those little graffiti of the bark shrines were carved. So, all right. Let me read this conclusion to you. We end with a short myth pertaining to Hapu that was said to Manetho, the Greek-educated Egyptian. The story tells of how Pharaoh Amenhotep III approached Hapu about how he could converse with the gods face to face as his ancestors had. Hapu went away to ponder and discuss the various options, no doubt with the gods themselves. It is said that he wrote a letter to the pharaoh stating that if he cleared the unclean, the shepherds and the lepers from the land of Egypt, he would then be able to converse with the gods face to face. Upon receiving Hapu's letter, Pharaoh removed all the shepherds and the lepers to the quarries of Egypt.
but he was unsuccessful in his desire to converse face to face with the gods. There was a second part to the letter that Hapu did not send with the original that pertained to the consequences of such actions, saying that the expelled victims of Pharaoh's obsession to communicate with the gods, who totaled 80,000 people plus, would align themselves with the enemies of Egypt and eventually invade and subdue Egypt for a total of 15 years. Unable to bear the guilt of not sending the second part through fear of upsetting his beloved Pharaoh, Hapu committed suicide. Josephus, the Hebraic historian, dismissed this story as pure myth and its plausible connection with the Hebrew Exodus. If you thirst for knowledge, if you want to know the answers, if you're tired of relying simply on what you've been told, then go to the headwaters, dip your face in the pond, the pool, and drink deep. The answers are there. You simply have to go there and look for them. You may not always find the answers you want, and you will have challenges before, during, and after, but continue to ask, seek, and dig for the facts that may lead you to the truth of the matter. As for Moses, you have been presented two equally illustrative pictures of who we, the authors, think the man might have been. We are not satisfied simply casting him off as a cultural legend that has been turned into a religious myth. We know the man existed, and yet we have drawn different conclusions based on our different paths and directions of study. But which one of us is right? Make no mistake, it truly doesn't matter, even though we have threatened to settle the argument between us with an arm wrestling contest. We seek because we want to know. And why would we want to know something that's inherently wrong? So yes, there is not only time, but heart, tears, intellect, and relentless digging to try to find the answers. We sometimes even hope there's some truth to be stumbled upon along the way. Was Moses a man named Senenmut, who was found by the daughter of the Pharaoh? Was he a high priest who served his Lord and Master and answered the call of the gods, or the God? Were the Hebrews a downtrodden people, held in bondage, or were they an integrated people trying to find their moorings in an ancient world? If you dig long enough and deep enough, you'll eventually find what you're looking for. It may not be the entire picture, but due to the never-ending search, you make it fit the scenario. Exodus is such a scenario. It has captivated and intrigued thousands of scholars for more than 2,000 years, and we're pretty confident that it will continue to do so for a very long time yet. End of the Exodus reality. Now, of course, there's all this matter at the end here, you see. All these pages, the admonitions of the Egyptian slave. We've got our bibliography in here. We've got our footnote, chapter footnotes, and so on and so forth. And that's all in here. And about the authors, I might as well read this to you. You kind of know who we are already. Scotty Roberts is the founder and publisher of Intrepid Magazine, intrepidmag.com, a journal dedicated to politics, science, culture, ufology, unexplained phenomena, alternative fringe theories, and world mysteries. He's the founder of the Paradigm Symposiums at paradigmsymposium.com. As an accomplished illustrator and designer, Scotty has spent the bulk of the last 3 decades in advertising and publishing. He is a historian, theologian, researcher, student of Egyptology, and a stalwart opponent of the big S skepticism, enjoying his role as a stand-up philosopher. Scotty attended Bible college and theological seminary and worked as a youth pastor for several years alongside his career in advertising and independent comic book publishing. He co-created the highly successful Ancient Heroes trading card series and began development on a line of young readers' books. He authored and illustrated his first historical novel, The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare, an anthropomorphized historical novel set in Tudor England, Ireland, and Scotland, which garnered broad attention with teen and college readers. Scotty is the author of The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, The Untold Story of Fallen Angels, Giants on the Earth and Their Extraterrestrial Origins, as well as The Secret History of the Reptilians, the pervasive presence of the serpent in human history, religion, and alien mythos. Scotty lives with his wife and children, who represent for him an hellacious roller coaster of befuddlement and joy just across the Minnesota border in rural Wisconsin, where he remains an avid Vikings fan and a stranger in a strange land. John Ward is an archaeologist, anthropologist, explorer, author, and public speaker from Hereford, England, but currently resides in Luxor, Egypt. Throughout the last 12 years, he's conducted numerous investigations into ancient Egyptian architecture, culture, religion, and its associated symbolism, culminating in various published articles and papers together with the scholarly presentations and talks. These investigations have enabled him to carry out assorted explorations of Egypt's vast landscape, from the arid deserts of the Western Sahara to the watery depths of the Hellenistic sunken city of Alexandria. Through extreme weather conditions, these explorations have provided a wealth of material and archaeological information that contributes to the overall research of ancient Egypt's rich historical past and how attributes of it have been integrated and assimilated within various cultures throughout history. He is also currently researching the many mysteries surrounding medieval Templarism and its possible connectivity through symbolism to Egyptian antiquity and its clear links to the various esoteric and hermetic cults throughout the ages. Currently, he is a member of the Gebel El Silsila Survey Project team, working at the ancient sandstone quarries, the source for many of the ancient Upper Egyptian temples. John lives on the west bank of Luxor, the former location of ancient Thebes, famous today for its ancient historical sites and tombs, with his partner of their menagerie of animals. This is prior to their marriage, he and Maria, and their children's births. So there you go. There is the book, The Exodus Reality. If you want to get one of these, and I can sign it for you, I'll inscribe it, as they used to say. John's not here to do that. We'd have to send it off to Sweden, where he's living at the present until their next season in Egypt. But if you want one of these, I've got a box full of these. And you just get a hold of me, contact me, and we'll figure out how to make it work best for you. So there you go, folks. That's it. Jamma says, I wonder if I've read some of your stuff, Scotty, and not realized it. Probably, possibly, could well be. Maybe, could be. I've written a lot of stuff over the years. Yes, thank you, Audrey. Visit streamingtalkradio.com for other Scotty and Rocky info. Rocky, who I'm on with in 13 minutes. TT, thank you. I'm glad it was a good experience for you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And, you know, John and I look back at this book now, and we want to do another edition of this. We looked at buying the rights to this from our publisher, and it was just too damn much money. So we may write another version of this with new information. So we're thinking about it. We'll see if that goes anywhere. We've got so many things, so many projects we're working on right now between the two of us. Let's see. I'm leaning towards sentiment, says Audrey. Yeah, you can let us know what you think. I tend to lean towards sentiment. He's my theory. I think he fits. John has some good information, but we just come down in different eras. We have different reasons for believing what we believe. So there you go. All right. I'm just looking through to see if anything's standing out. I'm just kind of scrolling back and so on. Let's see. Great pick of you, Dapper Dudes. Not sure where that was, Audrey, but thanks. Let's see. Beautiful stones, blue lapis, so on. Scotty would say, you're right on. There it is. Yes, Michelle. Okay. Well, there we go. I don't see too much there that we need to glean out, unless there's something that you want said. Jason, thank you. Jeannie, thank you. Audrey, Michelle, TT, Jama, Becky, Suze. I'm going through here, just seeing who all is here in the chat room tonight. Let's see. I think I may have hit you all. Hopefully I didn't miss any of you. Lola Joy, thanks for being here. And Iowa X, good to see you. And let's see. Gemma, Michelle. So on as Mary wins. Good to see you, Mary. Again. Appreciate your being here. And by the way, these chat rooms are all saved and archived with the video. So when you come back and you want to look at this again, you can scroll through the whole thing and see all of the chat room displayed as it happens in the video, which is kind of cool. So, all right, I'm going to leave it at that, folks, because we got about 10 minutes before I go on live with Rocky on the Situation Room. Come and join us here over at Rocky Stucci Media. I'm sorry, Rocky Stucci Situation Room, I think it is. Anyway, go find Rocky Stucci. You missed your first reading last night. That's okay, Michelle. Scotty Roberts withdrawal. You know what I'm thinking is next. We're not going to start it right away tomorrow. I'm going to do some programming, and I'm going to do some editorial and some commentary and things like that. But the next book I read will be this one. It'll be The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare. And it's just a fictional book, so I'm not going to do a lot of commentary in that. It's a storybook. So if you want to tune in for that, I'll let you know when we're going to do this. A little time down the road. We got other things to do. So there you go. Thank you again for being here. I appreciate it. You don't know what you mean to me, that you show up here every night and listen to me read and spout on. And as Audrey said, I talk too much. That's never been a fault of mine. I've never been short of words. So thank you for being here, putting up with me, listening to the books. And those are my 3 major books that I've written. The Nephilim, Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, the Secret History of the Reptilians, and now the Exodus Reality. And I've got some other things I've written as well, as you know. We'll get to those. So thanks for being here. Have a good night. See you over on Rocky's channel in about 7.5 minutes. Have a good night. Love you all. Good night.